So did you know that there is a football betting strategy that will allow you to profit before the season has even started? And in fact, there are key points around the season where this really comes into play. And it may sound a bit odd, but it's true. So if you want to find out exactly what that strategy is and how to do it, just watch the rest of this video. So when you look at modern football, what's the key determinant as to how well you're going to do over the course of the season? Will you win the league or finish bottom? Do you have a decent squad? What about the manager? But the fans are the best in the country, and that up and coming midfielder, well, he looks pretty good as well. There are many different factors that could account for your performance over the course of the season, but there is one factor that is very, very dominant. And ultimately, it comes down to money. And the interesting thing about the way that the league is structured now is that the teams that have the largest amount of turnover get the most amount of money, and they can buy the best players, the best facilities, the best coaches, the best managers, all of those things together, and they end up with the best results. There is a very strong correlation between teams that have the most amount of money performing well and the teams that don't end up getting relegated. That is a sad fact of modern football. It's not as competitive as it used to be, and it is absolutely, completely dominated by money. Now, from a betting perspective, this means that when you look at the odds for a team to perform well over the course of a year, you will tend to find that the teams that have the most amount of money will be the favourites to win any particular league or get promoted from a lower league, and the teams that are struggling financially will be the favourites to be relegated. That is just the way that it works. But the interesting thing is this also presents a great opportunity for us if we're going to be actively betting and trading on football. So let me explain exactly why that is the case. So this strategy is a bit unusual in that it picks on an unusual market. But stranger than that, one of the best opportunities that you get with this particular strategy is when there is no football on. I know that sounds really bizarre, but it's true. And what we're doing here is we're looking at the transfer window. So we know that teams that buy in talent will necessarily expect to finish higher in the league, and teams that don't do that will finish a little bit lower down in the league. Now, it's all relative to a certain aspect, because if you have a really good squad and you bring in some reinforcements, some new players, or get rid of some deadwood, then what you will find is that improves your chances of being able to go further up the league, but only relative to all of the other teams. So obviously, if you're a mid-table team and you bring in some new talent, then obviously that would lift your chance of finishing higher up the league. But if you're a top team and you bring in some talent, that will improve your chances, but only relative to the second team and how much they spend and stuff like that. So you need a little bit of football knowledge for this particular strategy, but essentially what you're doing is you're looking at the transfer windows and you're seeing what players are coming in or going out, or not coming in or not going out, and seeing how that will affect the chances of each individual team. And it's a relatively easy thing to do. And what will happen is when you look at all of the player transfers that are taking place, you'll be able to second guess what's going to happen within the market, because the market will end up discounting that into the price of a team winning a league, getting relegated or getting promoted and stuff like that. And that will be discounted into the market over a period of time. And what you can therefore do is, if you see, like, for example, a team bringing in a really good player, that will shorten their price of winning the league or getting promoted. So you can actually back it when that deal is sort of underway. And then as the transfer window begins to unfold, you'll begin to see their price getting pulled in. Likewise, if your team is unable to sign any decent players, then necessarily their chances of winning the league or getting promoted is going to decline, and the price will go out. So you can profit by backing and laying at those prices and then cashing out when that price move has taken place. But how realistic is this, and what sort of price moves do you see? Well, let's have a look at this year's transfer window. So we're going to focus on the Premier League on this video, though you can do this in any league, but obviously the liquidity is higher in the Premier League, and therefore it's easy to get your bets on, to cash out and to have a decent trade. But when we look at the top of the Premier League, obviously, because these are the big spending clubs right at the top, their prices are shorter, and most of your attention will be focused on those clubs, simply because that's where most of the money is, and that's where the shortest prices are, and therefore most of the betting activity, although you shouldn't exclude anything in there, as we'll see in a second. But yeah, if we have a look at some of these teams, and we'll see how their transfer window has gone and how that's affected their price to win the league. So if you're not familiar with individual football teams, there are websites that summarise the transfers that have taken place over the course of the season. And if we look at Liverpool, for example, you can see they've spent 308 million euros, I think they're measuring this in. And you can see here Florian Wirtz has come in at 125 million. Hugo Thingy Mabob has come in at 95 million. So they've made some big purchases here. But also they've moved on Luis Diaz. Darwin Núñez has about to be moved on, although it hasn't been formalised. So you can see they've done a fair bit of business, but they have actually spent more than they have received. So they are net spenders in this transfer window. So what do you think has happened to their odds of winning the title, given that they've brought in some big players for big money, and they've moved on some of their older players? Now have a think about how this has affected their price. So if we look at what's happened to the price of Liverpool, you can see the price has come in a little, not a dramatic amount. So the market's sort of saying, yeah, you got rid of some players, you brought some slightly better ones in, and that's probably improved the chance of you winning the title this year. That's essentially what the market has said on this occasion. So if we have a look at Chelsea, you can see that they've been bringing players back from loan. They've got a huge squad, but they also have the second largest expenditure so far this year in the transfer window. And they haven't sold too many players, certainly not in proportion to how many they've bought. What a surprise, Chelsea getting out the checkbook. So what do you think has happened to their price? Bearing in mind, they probably weren't expected to win the league, but they are increasing their spending at a rate that is higher than a lot of the other clubs. So Chelsea were at odds of 20 or so, which is about a 5% chance of winning the league. But because they've been splashing the cash again, their price has come into about 10. So that is about a 10% chance of winning the league. So it's a relatively small move, but obviously when you look at the odds, it looks quite dramatic. But that's simply because they were at a bigger price to start with. And of course, their spending relative to the rest of the league is much higher. So necessarily that has pulled the price in. So let's look at Newcastle, because their story is interesting this year. What I'm not going to do here is go through every single team in the league, because I'm sure that you are perfectly more than capable of doing your own research and taking on board what I'm saying here and going off and having a look for yourself. So I'm not going to do that. But let's look at Newcastle. Everybody that they've pursued, or nearly everybody that they've pursued during the transfer window, has said no. So they've not been able to sign many people. In fact, they've only made one real signing. And everybody else has just sort of indicated that they are not interested in playing for Newcastle, or they want to play for somebody else. And that includes Alexander Isak, their star player from last year, who wants to move to Liverpool. So they are very likely to end up net negative. They will not spend money this year. They will actually receive money if Isak actually ends up going to Liverpool for whatever fee. And as a consequence, that's going to have a significant impact, because relative to all of the other teams that they're competing with, they really aren't in the ballgame this year. They are falling behind. So what impact do you think that has had on their price? So when the market opened, Newcastle were at odds of 20, which is about a 5% chance of winning the league. But of course, they haven't been able to bring in those players. And in fact, what's turned out is that Isak has said he wants to go. That's not particularly great, especially if you don't have a replacement. So their prices continue to drift. So it looks like it's not going to be Newcastle's year, unless if Eddie Howe can somehow pull off some sort of miracle with the players that he's got, which is not impossible. But we're not concerned about something that is or isn't possible. We're just saying, what's the impact on the chances before the season has started? And in this case, it's particularly negative for Newcastle fans. So you should look at the other end of the table as well. And we should look at the relegation markets, because you will see the same effect here, but in reverse, in that the teams that don't spend or haven't got the same budgets as some of the other teams will be clustered at shorter prices to be relegated. And what you're looking for here is you're sort of saying, of the teams that we're looking at, which ones have spent more money or made good signings relative to the others. Because if these teams are heavy odds on, or at much shorter prices to be relegated, and they go out and splash the cash a bit, they're improving their chances of not being relegated. So what you will see here is the price will drift. And that's the sort of strategy that you would deploy here. Keep an eye on how much these teams are spending to try and stay in the Premier League. And if they're having a particularly good transfer window, then their price will drift from shorter prices. You can lay it at the lower price, back it at the higher price, and cash out for a profit before the season has even started. So let's have a look at some of these teams and see what their transfer window was like. So if we look at the relegation battle, I can summarise this really simply for you, and that is that Sunderland have spent more money than any of the other teams at the bottom. They've all spent a bit of money, but Sunderland has spent far more than anybody else, and this is clearly an attempt to stay in the Premier League. If we look at their expenditure, you can see they've spent over 140 million euros, and they have got a little bit of money in through the back door, but it's significantly less than the amount of money that they've spent. They have really invested in an attempt to stay in the Premier League. So what do you think has happened to their price? We can see, or we know, that most of the teams that get promoted are at short odds to be relegated again. What do you think has happened to Sunderland's price, given the amount of money that they've spent on bringing new players in? So relative to all of their relegation rivals, Sunderland have significantly outspent them. And as a consequence, you can see their price has drifted. The price has drifted because they were at heavy odds on to be relegated. There was a good chance of being relegated. That chance is getting less, and therefore their odds have lengthened. You could have laid them and backed them at a higher price, and you would have made money. So yeah, the amount of spending was directly correlated to this drift. So it's a curious strategy, but one that works really well. It's weird to be able to profit before the football season has even started. But what you're doing is you're focusing on that transfer window, and you're looking at how each of those teams has performed during the transfer window, because that will directly affect their chance of either winning the league or perhaps being relegated, or if we're in a lower league, getting promoted. And all we're doing is we're making a judgment on how good those signings are, how much money they've spent, and how that is relative to their peers. Because if they are outspending people that are in or around the same situation, then necessarily you'll see their price shorten as they stand a better chance of winning the league. Or if we're looking at the low end of the league in the relegation battle, then maybe they've got a better chance of staying in the league, and therefore their chance of relegation will begin to drift. By backing and laying these prices and cashing out when that move has taken place, then you can actually profit. And of course, we get another shot at this when we get round to the January transfer window, because teams that are willing to spend that little bit extra to avoid relegation or perhaps increase their title chances can improve their position at this time of the year as well. But yeah, it's an unusual strategy, but one that I discovered quite a few years ago, and something that I have a go at every year, simply because when you have a good or bad transfer window, that will directly affect the price, and that gives you the chance to be able to profit from it.